We have seen the family gathering. They haven't rushed up to Balmoral without very good reason. And one must suppose that whatever it is that they have now been briefed about, Buckingham Palace will feel the need to share that with the rest of the nation and indeed the Commonwealth at some point this evening.
One imagines, because as you said earlier, Nick, we're talking about a family. It's the royal family, and we're dealing here with Her Majesty the Queen, but it's family. And it's a mother and a grandmother and a great-grandmother whose health we are talking about. And I imagine that they have gathered with her to offer comfort.
Yep, one must assume that. And it is only what, I can't do it in my head, 20 months, is it, or since the Duke of Edinburgh's death,
yes.
Rather less than that.
Yes.
So, you know, this is a family which has suffered one death quite recently, and which is now having to deal with the illness and the declining health, as we understand it at the moment, of, as you say, their mother or their grandmother. It is perfectly possible that she will recover from this, or not perhaps recover, but that she will get over whatever issue it is that has caused the doctors to speak in the way that they have. So we must again stress that we don't know what the true situation is. We are merely anticipating and expecting that the palace will feel it necessary to say something. But as you say, Huw, at the heart of this is a family which is providing comfort to the Queen, and one must hope that that is the situation that is taking place within Balmoral Castle at the moment.
Nick, thank you. Well, the time is a minute past 6 o'clock, and if you're joining us here on BBC News, we are reporting the latest on the state of the Queen's health, because Her Majesty is under medical supervision at Balmoral Castle after doctors became concerned for her health. A statement from Buckingham Palace released earlier this afternoon said that the Queen, who's 96, was placed under supervision after further evaluation, they said, but they then went on to say she remains comfortable. Now, the BBC understands that all 4 of the Queen's children are now at the royal estate in Aberdeenshire. 4 senior royals arrived at Balmoral in the past hour. The Land Rover being driven by the Duke of Cambridge. Alongside him was Prince Andrew, Duke of York, and then the Earl and Countess of Wessex also with them. We are told that Prince Harry is also on his way, but he wasn't travelling with this party, and he's not travelling either with his wife Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex. She's not travelling to Balmoral. There's been lots of reaction, as you'd imagine, lots of expressions of alarm during the day. The Prime Minister, Liz Truss, saying that the whole country would be deeply concerned by the news. And she said that her thoughts and those of everyone in the UK were currently with Her Majesty and with members of the royal family. Let's just remind ourselves, just 2 days ago, the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, was officially asked by the Queen to form a government. Liz Truss became the 15th Prime Minister of the Queen's reign when she visited the Queen there at Balmoral. So that is a summary of where we stand right now at 3 minutes past 6, and our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell is with me, and Nick and I are keeping a very close eye on all the developments, watching the comings and goings there at Balmoral too. What would you say to viewers at this point, Nick?
I would say that I think once again, in the absence of any hard facts, that the images, I think, are now starting to tell the story. I was looking closely at that picture that we just showed of the Wessexes in the back of that vehicle. It's the first time we've seen the close-up of Prince Edward, or the Earl of Wessex, and Sophie, the Countess of Wessex. I thought they looked very sombre. I thought in particular she looks very sombre.
Yeah.
I think people, every individual must look at that photograph and draw their own conclusions. Yes. I'm not going to assist anybody in attempting to draw any conclusion, but I think she looks, sombre.
Yes.
Let's leave it at that.
Yes.
I think, they're arriving there at the gates of Balmoral Castle after dashing up from London, from their home at Bagshot, having been presumably summoned at some point this morning and briefed about whatever it is that has occurred at Balmoral Castle. And the family has come together and they have got on a RAF plane and they have flown straight to Aberdeen and then straight out to Balmoral. This against the background of the Queen's doctors having become concerned about her health. So that is the situation. We have heard the statements from senior politicians who will have been briefed on Privy Council terms. Current and previous Prime Ministers will know what the situation is. And I think, again, we just read into their statements a general sense of profound concern.
Well, that statement, Nick, of course, came from Buckingham Palace, and these are the images of the palace where there have been some crowds gathering during the course of the afternoon because, of course, the news has been getting around and people have been at the railings there, just waiting to see if there's any announcement, waiting to see if there's any news of the Queen's health. And some of those, of course, will be visitors to London. Others will be people who live in London or indeed are visiting London from other parts of the UK and beyond. How unusual, Nick, was the statement that was released by Buckingham Palace earlier today?
Extremely. They have made a point of not saying anything. As we've been discussing this afternoon, they insist that the Queen is entitled to patient confidentiality. They will not engage in a commentary about her health. So after telling us back in October, on October the 20th, that she was cancelling that visit to Northern Ireland and she had been advised by her doctors to rest, their statements have been few and far between. We have had briefings, if one can call them that the episodic mobility issues have from time to time reared their head and have prevented her from attending some of these major state events, the state opening of Parliament and so on and so forth. But they have not gone beyond that. They have not addressed the suspicion, and it's been a pretty widespread suspicion, that there has been some underlying condition in addition to the mobility problem. So for them to come out, having said last night that she was unable to chair the virtual Privy Council meeting, that it was necessary and that she was tired after the events with the incoming Prime Minister, that she was needing to rest last night, then this morning to hear the statement from Buckingham Palace. Yes, I think we can all quite reasonably and justifiably say that clearly something has happened that is giving rise to all of this concern.
With that, let's go to Downing Street then and talk to our political editor, Chris Mason. And Chris, we've already seen the image of the Queen smiling just 2 days ago, looking frail but smiling as she greeted Liz Truss, the new Prime Minister. What's going on in Downing Street today? The Prime Minister working there and obviously being fully informed about events at Balmoral.
That's right, Huw, yeah. So Liz Truss is working from Downing Street this evening. There are no plans for her to travel to Scotland, to Balmoral. As we've been reporting in the last few hours, several members of the wider royal family have been making that journey. It is, of course, as you say, just a couple of days ago that Liz Truss was there and was greeted by the Queen, had that audience with the Queen in which she was invited to form a government and to become Prime Minister just a matter of moments before the Queen had a final audience as Prime Minister with Boris Johnson, in which he tendered his resignation. And it was that reminder of the key role that the Queen plays right at the heart of the British political system, detached from democracy and yet somehow overseeing it and performing these central roles of state when governments come and governments go. And that announcement last night that she wasn't able to take part in that virtual meeting of the Privy Council, that's a gathering of senior ministers who meet in her presence regularly, an indication of her frailty. And in the last few months there have been those signs, haven't there, of her increasing age. So, for instance, the audiences that Prime Ministers have with the Queen, and hugely cherish, when you read the memoirs of Prime Ministers, they hugely cherish that opportunity they have, that discreet opportunity for a chat in private with the Queen, weighted and freighted as she is with all of the experience that she has meeting heads of state and government over decade after decade after decade. Traditionally, and for many years, they would happen in person at Buckingham Palace. In recent years, not least because of the pandemic, but continuing after that as well, those audiences happening remotely, again to account for those episodic mobility problems as reported by the Palace in recent months and years, and an acknowledgement of her increasing frailty and age. And even in the last 48 hours, a reminder here at Westminster of the role of the Queen in the formation of a government. Not just that moment that we so widely reported the other day and Liz Truss becoming Prime Minister, but also the appointment of ministers. When ministers are formally appointed, they are done so formally by the Queen. They are ministers of the Crown. So plenty here at Westminster, reflecting very profoundly and reflecting that profound concern that exists around the country and in many places around the world about the Queen's health this evening, so conscious as they are of that bind that exists constitutionally between Parliament, government and the royal household, the monarch personified for so long by the Queen.
Indeed, Chris, and it is one of those moments, and let's hope we get good news from Balmoral, but it's one of those moments when people do reflect on the kind of constitutional arrangement that exists and which the Queen has made work. She's really helped to oil the wheels of that constitutional arrangement, which lots of constitutional experts say, is not a normal arrangement. It's not an arrangement which on paper should be working. But of course, this notion of the Crown in Parliament as the constitutional monarchy is framed is one that today we reflect on because, of course, there is this axis, the axis of importance and continuity which stretches from the palace to Parliament and to the executive itself.
Yes, and we see this, don't we, when there are those moments, the state opening of Parliament, colloquially described as the Queen's speech, where the Queen comes along. She wasn't able to attend, of course, just a few months ago, but comes along to Parliament and sits there delivering out loud the government's words, saying what the government is planning to do in its legislative programme in the months and years ahead. And there's a particular moment in that ceremony, you may recall this, where the door is slammed in the face of an official called Black Rod, acknowledging the independence of the democratic House of Commons in that constitutional arrangement where the Queen, the head of state, sits at the top of it, Parliament below it. That point about the head of state, a striking one as well, Huw. I've travelled recently to the G7 summit in Bavaria and on to the NATO Defence Alliance summit in Madrid. And part of the formulation of the language of those events is that they are gatherings of heads of state and government. And that matters because, of course, in the UK system, we have a head of government in Liz Truss, the Prime Minister. We have a head of state in Her Majesty the Queen. And that distinction between the two so pivotal to how the UK system operates.
Chris, thank you again. Chris Mason, our political editor there with the latest for us in Downing Street. Well, from Downing Street, let's go to Windsor, because Windsor, of course, dominated by the great castle, and Windsor, I think it's fair to say, as our understanding goes, is the Queen's favourite residence, though she loves Balmoral as well. But at Windsor, our correspondent Helena Wilkinson has been there for us today. Looks slightly better weather-wise than it was earlier, Helena. What is your sense there of the way that the local community in Windsor, which has such a close bond with the royal family because of the proximity there, well, what's your sense of what people are saying in Windsor itself?
Yes, absolutely, Huw. And for those who don't know, Windsor Castle is right in the centre of Windsor. Just down the road is the high street full of shops, and local people, residents in Windsor, very much view the Queen as one of their neighbours, as a local resident. In previous years, she was often seen in the Great Park around here. We've spoken to a number of people here on the High Street, some emotional at the news of the Queen's health, and also many people just anxious to hear how she is. We haven't had another update from the palace since the one we got at just after 12:30 this afternoon. Lots of visitors coming out of the castle gates here. Some of them told us that they had heard the news from inside the grounds, others emerging not having heard. We know, of course, that the Queen spent much of the last 2.5 years here at the castle. As you mentioned, Huw, this is perhaps her most favourite royal residence. It's a lot of green space around here. It's somewhere where she loves to be. And she spent the last years of her husband's life, the Duke of Edinburgh, during lockdown. They remained here together, spending day after day together. They celebrated their 73rd wedding anniversary in November 2020. She, of course, made that trip, which is traditional for the Queen, to spend the summer months at Balmoral. She left here at Windsor Castle in July, and the Queen would traditionally return here to the castle in October. But the sense this evening, Huw, here, the feeling amongst locals and also visitors here, tourists here, there are some who've gathered just a bit down from where we are, is one of concern, deep concern about the Queen, wanting to know how she is, and anxiety. So I think everyone really is waiting for another statement from the palace to find out exactly how Her Majesty is.
Well, we await to see if that statement comes, Helena. Thank you very much. Helena Wilkinson there with the latest at Windsor. And of course, Windsor is where the Queen spent so much of the lockdown period, much of that with the late Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. But in July this year, the Queen decided that she really did want to maintain the tradition of spending lots of the summer at Balmoral in Aberdeenshire, in the glorious countryside there. And of course, Balmoral Castle is one of the favourite homes of the Queen, where she's spent so many happy times during her long life, going back to her childhood. And it brings back lots of memories of happy times with her parents and her sister Margaret. And of course with her family when they were young, and then growing up with Prince Philip as well, as they enjoyed the countryside and the picnics and the barbecues around Balmoral. So it's a place of great happiness for the Queen. And that's the reason she decided that she really did, despite her mobility problems and health issues, she wanted to leave Windsor in July and go to Balmoral as usual. And she is, of course, a stickler for tradition. So Buckingham Palace there on the right, very much seen as the office, if you like. That's where the working quarters are. Windsor, not too far away to the west, is really the kind of favourite home, the main home, where lots of work is also done. And then, of course, we have the other residences, Balmoral, which we are familiar with in summer. And then, of course, Sandringham in the east of England. And there are a few others too. Of course, there's Holyrood House in Edinburgh. So we are looking today at news from Balmoral. That's our focus today. It's not Buckingham Palace, really. It's Balmoral, and that is where the Queen is being kept comfortable by the team of doctors who are there and who have just put that unusual statement out earlier today. Unusual because it was rather forthcoming, saying that they were concerned. They were now concerned about the state of the Queen's health, and that she was comfortable at Balmoral, that some of the family now who've arrived there to see their mother, in the case of Prince Charles and Princess Anne, and Andrew and Edward, and then, of course, a grandson in the form of Duke of Cambridge. They're all there, and we imagine that they've been talking to the doctors there and have had their briefing, and one imagines that they are with the Queen, keeping her company and making sure that she's as comfortable as possible. Now, at Balmoral is my colleague James Cook, who's the BBC's Scotland editor. And James, could you bring us up to date, please, on what's been going on there?
Yes, Huw, no sense of drama here, no sense of panic, a sense instead of a well-rehearsed plan quietly swinging into action. For most of the afternoon, it was relatively calm here. The rain teemed down, leaving the purple heather around this estate sodden. Every few minutes or so, another photographer, another reporter would cross Isambard Kingdom Brunel's bridge across the River Dee and make their way here to the gates of Balmoral. And then at 5:05, a flurry of flashbulbs as senior members of the royal family swept past us. Prince William driving a Range Rover, Prince Andrew next to him, and in the back Prince Edward and Sophie, the Countess of Wessex. I could see grim faces. Certainly Andrew, I saw clearly, very grim-faced Andrew as they drove past and into this estate, which of course has been one of the favourite places, if not the favourite place of the Queen for many, many decades of her reign. An estate, a 50,000-acre estate dating back in terms of its association with the royal family to Queen Victoria, the castle here built for her in the 1850s. And of course a place where we know the Queen has many fond memories of spending time with her late husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, not least because the photograph that was released by the family on his death was a photograph of the two of them together in the hills on this estate.
James, just a thought here about the Queen's relationship with Scotland as well, because of course we're at a time where there's been a lot of debate about the future shape of the United Kingdom. The Queen, of course, represents the solid element of continuity, and that's an interesting thing for us to reflect on, given her great affection for Balmoral and indeed for Scotland.
Yes, this is surely a monarch who personifies the union of the crowns of 1603 as much as she does anything else. The constancy that we talk about that applies to her reign actually goes way back before her reign in terms of the royal family's relationship with Scotland, predating the Act of Union, the Union of the Parliaments in 1707. And indeed the Queen has been a constant figure associated with that union of the crowns. Not, it has to be said, Huw, always without controversy. And the Silver Jubilee speech, which the Queen gave in 1977 at Westminster, when she talked about the benefits union had conferred at a time when the Labour Party was proposing to devolve power to Wales and to Scotland, proposals that were ultimately defeated. That certainly raised eyebrows. Eyebrows were raised in 2014 when the Queen, attending Crathy Kirk, just along from the gates of Balmoral here, talked about people considering the future, thinking very carefully about the future as they decided how to vote in the referendum on independence, which the people of Scotland ultimately rejected. The palace, of course, strongly denied that there was anything wrong with that comment, said it was a perfectly sensible thing to say, to urge people to think very carefully about such a serious issue. And of course there is deep affection for the Queen in parts of Scotland. It is fair to say that if you look at the polling, the monarchy is not as popular north of the border as it is south of the border, but the Queen is certainly more popular than the monarchy in Scotland, and that is certainly reciprocated on her behalf. She's talked of her deep and abiding affection for this nation.
And a thought, James, as well about the place that Balmoral plays in the great royal landscape, if you like. You've mentioned the fact, and we mentioned earlier, the fact that the Queen has a great affection for it, and its heritage goes back to Queen Victoria's time. We're talking about Aberdeenshire, which of course is lots of it, very, very beautiful. The landscape there is magnificent. And as you say, very significant that rather lovely image of the Queen and the Duke, released when the Duke died, was indeed in the hills above Balmoral, on this enormous estate that the Queen has there.
Yes, that's right. And the Queen has been coming here regularly with her family for the summer and into the early autumn, year after year after year. It's very clear that this place is somewhere for which she holds extremely deep affection. We just see another police car going through the gates there of Balmoral Estate. Yes, Huw, you're right. I mean, there is definitely an affinity. I mean, if you look back through the newsreel footage, back through the years, here she was in the 1960s, buying an ice cream for one of the young princes just along the road in one of the local shops. One of the few places really where I'm not saying the Queen routinely walks up and down the streets of Ballater and Braemar, but it would be a place where she would not be troubled by people locally if she were to do so, because people are very used to seeing senior members of the royal family. Indeed, I remember one occasion somebody telling me that just outside these gates here, they were driving along and there was a car waiting with its indicator on to turn into the gates, and as they drove past they realised it was none other than Queen Elizabeth at the wheel.
Well, James, thank you very much. James Cook with some nice memories there of the Queen and life in Balmoral. But today we are reflecting on the state of the Queen's health, sadly, and we're just waiting to see whether Buckingham Palace or the officials at Balmoral make another statement, having said at lunchtime that the Queen's doctors are very concerned about the state of the Queen's health, that she is comfortable, that they had no more to say at that point, but they felt it necessary to convey the fear and the anxiety that was being felt. And that is why, of course, we've now seen the Duke of Cambridge, Duke of York, the Earl and Countess of Wessex and some others making their way to Balmoral. They've arrived there. The Prince of Wales already there, and the Duchess of Cornwall too. The Princess Royal is there. So the family, the family is gathered, and we're told that the Duke of Sussex, Harry, is on his way, but he wasn't with the party that arrived a short while ago. Watching the images with me, Nicholas Witchell, our royal correspondent, and Nick, James there was underlining the special place that Balmoral holds, because really some people may be wondering why the Queen in September is in Balmoral. Why is she not back in Windsor or even in Buckingham Palace? But it's important to underline that that's normal. That's what she does.
And she, of course, she loves to have the routine, to have the sense of confidence that you get from an unchanging routine. And so much of her year never changes. So, yes, I think the annual trip up to Balmoral is really very important to her. And it is somewhere where she feels very comfortable, very much at ease, somewhere that she has known all her life. So the time is approaching 6:30 now, isn't it? I was struck by what James Cook was saying about the grim faces that he noticed on the faces of the members of the royal family as they drove into Balmoral Castle a short time ago. We are still waiting to see if there is something from Buckingham Palace. There is nothing to report on that front at the moment, but of course that could change at a moment's notice. The situation, as we understand it at the moment, continues to be that there is widespread and deep concern about the health of the Queen. Following the statement by her doctors this morning, clearly there has been some episode which has occurred overnight, which has given rise to that concern and which prompted the doctors and Buckingham Palace to put out a statement indicating that there is concern about the Queen's health. Members of her family have broken off and travelled to Scotland. Prince Charles and the Duchess of Cornwall were already there. They have travelled across to Balmoral Castle, where they have also been joined by the Princess Royal. And other members of the royal family, 4 members of the royal family, have travelled up from London on an RAF flight. The Duke of Cambridge, the Duke of York, and the Earl and Countess of Wessex.
There is expectation now, clearly, Nick, if we look at the images here of Buckingham Palace and the area in front of it, dominated, of course, by the Queen Victoria Memorial at this end of the Mall. But crowds now starting to gather at those gates, where announcements in the past have been made, of course, about all kinds of things and events in the royal family's life. But I think today reflects really a crowd which is starting to gather, just basically expressing concern and just hoping for the best, is how I'd put it.
Yes, I think that is the fairest way we can put it, Huw. Millions of people here and elsewhere will be hoping for the best, but they will be, I think, now fearing the worst and perhaps preparing for the worst. But we must continue to hope that whatever news we get from Buckingham Palace will indicate that things are okay at Balmoral. But I think that is as much really as we can say at this stage. There is great concern. That concern has been expressed by politicians at the most senior level, and they will know what the true situation is. They will have been briefed, and they will have briefed each other on Privy Council terms. So I think that that is the fairest indication that we can give to our viewers, both here and around the world at this stage, that there is, as we keep saying, there is profound concern, there is deep concern, but at this stage we do not have any further news from Buckingham Palace.
Nick, we're just looking at these images here because, of course, they are really reflecting people's deep alarm and deep concern about the fact that the Queen is extremely unwell, and, of course, that we are expecting the news from Balmoral that she's having treatment, or that, indeed, they are unable to help Her Majesty anymore. A few moments ago, Buckingham Palace announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. The Palace has just issued this statement. It says the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. Within the past few minutes, Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. To recap on the statement, the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King, that is Charles, and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. Her Majesty was 96 years old. She became Queen on the 6th of February 1952, on the death of her father, King George VI. She heard the news while staying at a game lodge in Kenya at the age of 25, and her coronation in Westminster Abbey was watched by more than 20 million people. She was married to Prince Philip for 73 years until his death in April of 2021. And Charles, their first child, was born in 1948. He now becomes the new king. In 2015, Her Majesty passed Queen Victoria to become the longest reigning monarch in British history. And in February 2022, we saw the 70th anniversary of her becoming Queen. And she made more than 250 visits to Commonwealth countries, and was head of state in Australia and Canada and New Zealand. Winston Churchill was Britain's Prime Minister when she came to the throne, and Liz Truss was her 15th Prime Minister.